You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
That's choice, VA choice, where rather than waiting online for weeks and weeks and dying, you have people went in, they're moderately, they have a minor problem, they end up, it takes so long, they end up terminal. Now they go see a doctor and we pay for the doctor.
Okay. Where's our secretary? He's got to make it work, so we have to hear that.
Those wait times, a big part of President Trump's, then candidate Trump's promises to the veteran community when he sought your vote, asking you to elect him president of these United States. The American people did, and now we're going to get an update on those wait times from the Secretary of the VA. President Trump said veterans' choice would be a big thing, how I understand it, and we welcome back Robert Wilkie, the Secretary of the VA here, to give us an update on how that's going. I noticed when President Trump expanded this program and handed you a pen, and I think it was back in 2018, he sort of pointed at you and said, now this is the guy who has to get it done. So it's your job to help reduce wait time for veterans when they're trying to see their doctor. I understand if it goes past 3 or 4 weeks and they can't get in to see their VA doctor, whether it's a regular physician or a specialist, then there's this sort of spillover where they can go see a private doctor somewhere. But just last year, I want to ask you about a report from the Government Accountability Office that found that veterans in this program were still waiting some 51 to 64 days to get in and see one of those doctors, not meeting that 30-day guarantee in this program. That's a year old now. Where is that number today? Do you monitor that? And how well is that program succeeding?
Well, I first address it by saying that VA is now experiencing all-time record high in terms of its approval rating for healthcare. We're at 90%. The last administration was lucky to get to 52. I think that was their high point. And last year, we set a record for the number of appointments taken care of within VA at 59.9 million. The choice that the president talks about was our way of saying that if we don't have a service that a veteran needs in a timely manner, we will make sure that that veteran can access care in the private sector. And that was our response to the great expanse of the United States, meaning there are places in this country, in Texas and Montana in particular, in some parts of California and Arizona and Utah, where you're taking hundreds of miles in just a round trip to get to and from a VA facility at the same time you pass other medical facilities. We don't want to put that burden on a veteran if we can avoid it. But what we have seen, though, is that veterans are voting with their feet, and they are choosing in greater numbers to stay with us because people here understand the culture and speak the language. 40% of our employees are veterans themselves. The leadership here at VA headquarters, we all have extensive military experience, which means when we walk in, we understand what veterans experience because we've experienced it in our lives, not only ourselves, but also with our families.
And it's really hard to just sort of manufacture or simulate that camaraderie between veterans. When you feel that, when you're in a room with them, it really is a unique kind of connection I think many of them still crave.
Also add that in addition to those approval numbers, this place in the last 2 years has gone from 17 out of 17 in terms of best places to work, according to the Nonpartisan Partnership for Public Service, to number 6. That is an incredible change when it comes to morale. And the statistic that I like to use is that during this time of epidemic, we actually have fewer requests for leave. We have fewer absences than we did this time last year when there was no epidemic. So our employees are staying on post and they're doing their duty, and they put themselves in harm's way. And this is probably the best story in government.
So you're making the case that it can be done and that government can do its job well in the right circumstances. I want to ask you what we can learn from that, because you've said in other previous interviews that wait times, especially for specialists, are even better at the VA than they are in many cases for the private sector. I think you used Orlando as an example there, but are there any broader policy lessons that we as a country can learn from that example? Because in the broader political context, there are politicians in Congress right now who say, well, we don't want the government to run healthcare. that's a bureaucratic system. It's a tangled weave. It's a mess. It's not always customer friendly. And yet, here you are making the case that in fact it can happen and it can be done well, maybe because you don't have the overhead of having to pay shareholders for profit or the overhead of administrative burden that some corporations or some insurance companies might add into that equation. So what is it that the VA does well that the country might learn from as we all reimagine the future of American healthcare as a whole?
Well, you have to remember that we are a unique family. This is an earned benefit for a particular part of the American population. And it is an agency that is populated by people who come from that world. What I would say that is different about us is the focus on customer service. When a veteran walks in, that veteran knows that there's somebody on the other side who appreciates what he or she has gone through because they probably lived it as well. But it's not rocket science. It is a personal approach to medicine that I don't think can be quantified in just bare statistics or policy programs. And that's really what has changed here. And that is our focus on customer service, first internally, to make sure that we are communicating with each other, because if you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to serve the veterans that are part of your world. But that is why we are different. And it's not something that can be readily shared or replicated, I think, in any other setting because of the unique nature of our family and the unique nature of what the country owes to these people.
Yeah, that's interesting. It sounds like you're describing the intangibles of maybe empathy or brotherhood or shared burden or sacrifice with your neighbors, but that could be, I guess, generated through a different way. It's just interesting to see how that might cross over with our healthcare system. I don't know that
pressures. I just presented the largest budget in the history of this department to the Congress. That's on top of the second largest budget in our history, which was last year, $240 billion. The House of Representatives raised me $10 billion. So we don't have those kinds of pressures that the private sector in many cases would have.
Yeah, that's interesting to watch. I have to ask you about another ongoing media report while I have you. I understand you're right now under investigation from the Inspector General at the VA after there were reports published that you spoke with Congressman Dan Crenshaw about Andrea Goldstein, a Navy veteran who claims that she was sexually assaulted at a VA hospital. She happened to be in the same deployment to the Middle East with Crenshaw. I believe sources told ProPublica that you might have wanted to know if there was any dirt out there that might somehow discredit Ms. Goldstein or her story. Your office has strongly denied that, but emails...
There was no separate investigation here, plain and simple. And I've said that. I will tell you that my great concern was one for the protection of all the patients who walked into the DC VA, and I did express frustration about the length of the investigation. It wasn't a complicated investigation, but there was no separate investigation, and you certainly didn't see anything in the media as a result of anything we did here.
Separate investigation is interesting. So within the original or the primary investigation, then, well, your emails would later show that when the press started looking into this and the investigation was ongoing, that it appeared to my eye that you might have been trying to get your story straight. You asked one of your assistants in an email, quote, "Did Crenshaw say he did not talk about it being Ms. Goldstein? If you never spoke about it with him, why would you need to ask that question?"
No, what I said, I didn't know what he had said. And I think that's what the email said. I was told that the congressman said something, and I wanted to see what he had said. But the bottom line is there was no separate investigation. There was nothing told to the press. And that's a very simple answer to what went on.
You're saying there was no separate investigation, but if there was no investigation into Ms. Goldstein at all, then what would give you the confidence to... By the Inspector General, okay. That's helpful. In a January 15 letter to Congressman Mark Takano, who chairs the House Veteran Affairs Committee, You said that sexual assault claim was unsubstantiated, and that you already alluded to this, that her claim could deter our veterans from seeking the care that they need and deserve. First, a two-part question. Do you believe Ms. Goldstein?
Well, I certainly believe that something happened, but I'm going off of the Inspector General's own words. If you look at his website, they're either substantiated or unsubstantiated allegations. And if there are unsubstantiated allegations, he is required to give me a report as to what he thinks happened. And he did not do that in contravention of his own directive. My goal is to make sure that our facility is safe, and that is the only thing that I was concerned about.
Yeah, that's what I wondered about, was the philosophy there. You mentioned that her claim could deter veterans from seeking the care they need. Couldn't, aggressively ferreting this out, smoking out what exactly happened, punishing anyone who might have been involved, owning up to it publicly and saying this can't happen, this culture can't happen here, couldn't that also send the message that veterans were?
After 4 or 5 months of investigation. And I'm the first one, if you look at my record, I've relieved thousands of people for not performing their jobs. That includes the highest levels of this department. So I have a pretty good track record when it comes to relieving people who are not doing their duties. And so that's what I rest on.
I think the president expanded your ability to do that, to fire people who are not performing.
Yeah. So if there are any questions on this, they need to go to the Inspector General and what his duty is, and I think we'll be better off if those are that responsibility is more clearly defined.
I see, and I appreciate your answers on that. Before we let you go, I do want to ask you, in 2018, you wrote in the USA Today, quote, "No president has done more in 2 years to strengthen our military and reform the Department of Veterans Affairs to better serve our nation's heroes than President Donald Trump." You said, from pushing the Islamic State terrorist organization to the brink of defeat, to increasing troop strength and modernizing our military's equipment on the battlefield, Trump sends a strong signal to any country or terrorist group that confronting the United States or our allies is a losing proposition. We mentioned it earlier, you've worked for Jim Mattis, you've also worked for Condoleezza Rice, Donald Rumsfeld, a lot of secretaries of defense and American diplomats. I wonder how you take it, being in the Trump administration, but then hearing the man you used to work for, Jim Mattis, say that, quote, "Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us." What do you think Jim Mattis thinks? Or what do you think when you see these?
The issue I was addressing was readiness. The issue I was addressing was the state of VA. The Department of Veterans Affairs in the last administration was scandal after scandal.
Right.
You had veterans dying in the halls. And I would argue that is because of the calculated indifference on the part of the last administration. That is not happening here. We have, as I mentioned, an approval rating for our healthcare of 90%. They were lucky in the last administration to get to 52%. So I stand firmly on my contention that this president had reversed the course that the last administration was on, which I'm happy to say, I've said it in testimony, that there was great indifference to this department in the last administration. And I can tell you, having presented the 2 largest budgets in the history of this department, we're putting our money where our mouth is.
And I hear you on that, and I do want to be clear, not to mix or confuse 2 issues, but today's military members are tomorrow's veterans, and I wonder what message it sends them when President Trump shrugs off information or intelligence that Russian soldiers are putting a bounty on American soldiers' head, when he dismisses outright.
In that circle anymore. I would have been had I remained at the Pentagon. But I can tell you that having still serving, that the resources that we have at our disposal are infinitely greater than they were in the last administration. And I would also note that this administration has taken the fight to America's enemies in ways that the last administration would never contemplate, including the removal of the world's greatest terrorist, Soleimani. And I think that is a legacy that is worth heralding, and I'm happy to be part of that administration.
But you're an advocate, you're a voice for America's veterans in this position. And how does it strike veterans when they see the president say that he acknowledges that the Russians are arming the Taliban, but sort of dismisses it? And in a call with Vladimir Putin, he says he didn't even bring it up. You said that this president confronts our adversaries
in the last administration, and I was on active duty in part of that administration, and Putin invaded Ukraine. The only thing President Obama did was send meals ready to eat. This president sent weapons that took out Soviet tanks and Soviet aircraft. He didn't send macaroni and cheese to the Ukrainians. That is the difference between what this administration has done and what the last administration didn't do.
Interesting. So is it your view that
59.9 million veterans last year had appointments in VA? That is an all-time high. They were fleeing this department in the last administration. So look, the most important thing for us is to make sure that we take care of veterans' health. And that is what we are doing in ways that the last administration did not do.
Yeah, and I guess my last question before we let you go, and I appreciate the time, I do, but of course, as we mentioned, today's service members are tomorrow's veterans, and the foreign entanglements that we find ourselves in dictate how many of those veterans come back from the battlefield with psychological trauma, with physical wounds, or otherwise. Is there something in our foreign policy that you'd like to see continue or change that might yield veterans of tomorrow?
I'm not privy to the plans of the Pentagon. I'm not privy to intelligence. What I can tell you is that when service members transition, they are given briefings and they're giving information on how to join VA. And they're doing that in record numbers. They certainly have done that in the last 2 years. So I think the numbers point to the confidence that veterans have in this system. And it is a system that I think is showing the rest of the government that things can be done.
Very interesting. Well, I appreciated your insight, especially as someone who's been around and in the Pentagon for so long and now leading up the Department of VA, where your goal has been to clean up in-house so that whenever our service members do come home and join the ranks of the veterans, they have better care greeting them. Of course, they deserve our very best. But Secretary of the VA, Robert Wilkie, a pleasure. Thank you for joining us here on Capitol Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, we're back in just a moment.